So, ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, and all in their time to join us today, I would like to welcome you to this session with the title Taking African Languages to the Next Generation. We want to thank Pan African Writers Collective, Jalanda Africa, for organizing this year's language symposium. Teaching the young to speak, read, and write in African languages is one of the most assured ways to have a future generation of change makers in Africa, in African language use. As we know, Africa has been the only place in the world where children are taught in the languages in their own mother tongue. This is why this discourse and this conversation is very important. Before I open our guest speakers today, please do allow me to acknowledge that we do not stand alone and that we are those who come before us and set the blueprint for us. So my name is Dr. Rahab Njeri. I'm a historian based in Germany. My field of research are post-colonial studies, gender studies, Africana studies, African history, to mention but a few. I'm also the founder of CAL Awards, which stands for Kemet Award for Achievement in African Languages. And this is an award in honor of the Professor Kimani. To join me today in this our conversation talking about African languages to the next generation, we have the privilege of talking to Dr. Utheri Kanayo and Professor Kimani Njogu that I'm going to introduce briefly. So I will start introducing Dr. Utheri, who is also known as Susan Kiragu. She holds a PhD in education from the University of Cambridge in the UK. After 8 successful years in the UK, she relocated back to Kenya in 2015 to actively serve African children and be part of the change she wanted to see. She's a co-founder and principal of Children in Freedom School, CIFS, the only Afrocentric school in CIFS strives to nurture children who own their African heritage, embrace both local and foreign languages, competent in their talents, and ready to change the world. Dr. Utheri aims for CIFS gold standard of what education should be for the Black child and hopes that in the future, the CIFS model will be absorbed by other schools in Africa and in the world. She's also the regional coordinator for the Beacon Scholarship, an outstanding leadership program for gifted African children. In addition, she's a fellow. So welcome, Dr. Utheri.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Our next speaker is going to be Njogu, the director of Faweza Communication Center, commissioner of the African Academy of Languages, ACALN, and chair of the Creative Economy Working Group, a network of organizations engaged in policy and legislative reforms for the development of cultures and languages of Kenya. He is the chair of UUGI, the Kikuyu Language Association, and is a founder member of the Utheri Journal. He has translated Kiswahili poems by Abdul Latif Abdallah and Almin Mazuri into Kikuyu. We welcome you, Njogu.
Thank you very much.
So we'll kick off our conversation today with a very basic question, which is why should children learn their mother tongues? And we'll start with Dr. Utheri.
Mother tongue is your first language. So it's your own. It's who you are. It's how you communicate to the world. It's how you get to hear from the world. It's how you get to nurture both inside and outside of you. So remember, it's the first, meaning then it's what captures what is in your environment, what is in your surrounding, the culture of who you are, the culture of your parents, the culture of your people, the culture of your community. So that goes without saying, it's just common sense that then we must learn our mother tongues. And there's something really wrong or unbalanced when you don't learn the very language of who you are. So let's just make it clear, take it or leave it. Mother tongue is not supposed to be an option, okay? It becomes an option when matters of power, politics, the political, come into place. Why should people not learn and embrace the very language that is about who you are? If you are not going to learn it and you're going to sideline it, because that's what has happened so far, to many of us, if you're going to sideline it, then you're sidelining who you are, and it's going to follow you for the rest of your life, where rather than being your authentic self, you try to replace yourself with what you think is better, with the language that you think is better, that follows with an identity that you think is better, with knowledges that you think are better than your authentic ones. So let me pass over to Professor Kimani. I could talk about this all day.
Thank you, Dr. Utheri, for really making that very very strong comment. And before Dr. Njeri asks me the next question, I just want to underline precisely what you have said, that the language that brings you into the world should be the language that you start learning. Because language is more than just communication. Language is also about history, about culture, about identity, about who you are in the world. And what is even more, powerful is the recognition that beyond the colonial experience, or before the colonial experience, this question of what language people should learn was never an issue. We learned our languages naturally. You got into the world and you learned your mother tongue. The colonial encounter, it became important that suddenly we have to start rationalizing, why we should learn our languages.
Yes.
But it should never be an issue at all, really. Njeri.
Yes, I think you've mentioned something that is very important. That this is our first mother tongue. This is the language that you're born with. This is your right to be able to speak your own mother tongue, right? Because we know even when you're in our mother's belly, the language that the children hear while in stomach is the mother's language. So they already learn it even before born. And very also very important that it's not only a means of communicating, but it's also a way of showing our culture and our identity, right? So and the history, us being able to learn about our own history through our own mother tongues, I think for me as a historian is very important, which is what I am doing right now. That I do not speak my mother tongue. I cannot write it. I cannot read it. I just learned how to speak a few months ago, and I'm in the process of learning it. This is also a way of me reclaiming that culture and that history that has been taken away from me, being able to express myself in Kikuyu, and being able to even think in Kikuyu. For me, that's a huge step. And I normally have issues when I hear we are told, or I think this only happens in the African continent, because in Europe, this doesn't happen, right? We celebrate the diversity
Absolutely.
of the different languages, right? Yet in Africa, we are told you should actually do away with their diversity and use one language, become monolingual, and it's also seen or a hindrance for our progress as a people. And so this was going around in the European context of us Africans have to give away our languages, as Professor Kimani has said. The colonial structures that still do continue to structure the African continent between the language boundaries are still very much present up till today. I don't know if you also have the same feeling, who in the diaspora has the feeling.
No, it's such a serious issue, really, because Africa has always been multilingual. I mean, when I grew up, I found my father speaking a number of languages. I mean, he spoke Kikoyo, he spoke Kipsigis, he spoke Kisi, and he could say a couple of words in the Luo. I mean, he was multilingual, and most Africans have always been multilingual. People speak about 5, 6 languages, easily. But within the space of because of the colonial encounter, there is this loss, and it's also happening not just within the diaspora, but also within our own countries, where young people are growing without speaking, their mother tongue, and of course, a part of it is the power that has been given to European languages. So you have English as the language through which you access, opportunities, or French for that matter, or German, and so on. And that African languages do not open any doors for you. I mean, you don't get a certificate of excellence for speaking, for example, Gikuyu, but you get a certificate of excellence for speaking, French and so on. And people are wowed by the fact that you actually speak, Russian, or you speak some other language, but they are not surprised that you have mastery of your mother tongue. So this asymmetry of power is a problem, not just within the diaspora, but also within the continent itself. And I think that all work that needs to be done to realign the situation must be very, very deliberate and very, very systematic. And I think this is really the thing, that it has to be very deliberate. It must be part of our decolonization agenda, the decolonization of the mind, the decolonization of institutions and so forth. So that would be my take on that. I don't know whether Dr. Utheri agrees with this positioning.
Totally, you're preaching to the choir. I'm just here thinking of how what Dr. Njeri asked at the beginning, why should we learn our mother tongue? And I went into how it's important for our identity. Then Professor Kimani, now you've talked about how our own languages are not recognized. You don't get any certificate of nothing, even certificate of I don't know what, even just for knowing it. Because it now shows you, if our own language has been relegated to the back seat, then what about you yourself as the owner of the language? It goes hand in hand. And I think that's really powerful, because this conversation is just not about the importance of language, but it opens up spaces to critique and think deep about what does that then say about me, the African person, me, the Black person. How am I even relevant, valued in the global space if my own language is relegated to the back? I read something the other day. I think it's been shared many times, about a language like English should not be the I don't know, the tester or equalizer of intelligence. Okay, it doesn't mean because you speak English then you're better off or you're more clever than the other person. It's just a language. But because of the power that has been heaped, and the meaning, the narrative of meaning of the language that has been heaped for so long, it has been seen as that if you speak English, then you come across as a more educated, more able person than someone who is speaking their Gikuyu, their Doluo, their Kisi, which is now very ridiculous and irrelevant. So the whole idea of language should also tell us more about the person, the politics of the person, the politics of belonging, the politics of relevancy.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And I mean, and following on that, the second question, we have this thing in not only in Kenya, but even in the African continent. And a lot of, children can relate to this, and even grown-ups, if you have grown in the continent, where we have the different modes of punishment when children, whether in public or in private schools, when they speak their mother tongues, that they're punished for it, right? So for me, I have a feeling that most of these punishments in their symbolism actually emphasize the uselessness of the African languages. So, following that, Utheri has said, so my question would be, is it enough to teach children their mother tongue, or do we also not need to decolonize institutions such as schools and re-educate teachers who continue reproducing colonial legacies associated with African languages? Mr. Kimani? Professor
Yes,
Kimani,
thank you
please.
so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Rahab, for that question. Absolutely. So these are about mindsets. The first, so we need to decolonize, our minds, ourselves, so that we see value in ourselves, and we see that there is nothing wrong with us languages, and there should never be anything wrong with us speaking our languages. It's one of the most ridiculous situations where you find that there's something wrong with you speaking the language which is your language. Now, with regard to institutions, I think it's a very serious matter, because I remember also growing up, the emphasis on English as the language that we needed to speak in school. And I remember we would actually be punished for speaking, our mother tongue. So we need to decolonize these institutions. We need to show our institutions that in reality, when you deny children the opportunity to speak their languages, you make them lose confidence themselves, and that is really, really bad, because they move around the world imagining that there is something wrong with them. And I think that from the earlier stages, right from the early educational levels, it is very important that our children know that they can speak their language, within educational institution or outside of an educational institution, and that there is nothing wrong, so long as they are conscious of the audience that they're addressing. So, in my view, we need to decolonize our institutions, our educational institutions. We need to give them the confidence that our kids can learn their mother tongue, and they can learn English, and they can learn mathematics and chemistry and biology and everything, that there is no contradiction at all. I think that we just need to this, Rahab.
Yes, absolutely. These forms of of punishment, as you said correctly, also make our own children question their own identity, and kind of tears them into two, because on the one side, you are born in the African continent, you are born in Kenya, you are born in a particular family speaking a particular language, and then when you go to school, you are punished exactly for speaking that language. So we kind of have this thing of children being torn between almost two worlds, right? It always reminds me of the boys not really fitting in both worlds, right? Like you're kind of forced to be able to speak other languages, language. And then the question is always, how are these children, this generation going to grow up, and what is their association, positive or negative, to their own mother tongues? Once the diaspora, it becomes even more complicated, because for us in the beginning it wasn't that bad, but now when you start getting your own children, you start in also the questions of belonging, the politics of belonging, as Dr. Utheri said, and how do you also want your children? How do you create safe spaces for your own children in your own house to speak the language, right? So, there's this, it's a kind of a discourse that is going, both on the African continent and both in Europe, especially for people of African descent in the diaspora, that we really want to learn the mother language. We want to learn the African languages, because we see that as a sense of a sense of knowing who we are and really going back to our roots by being able to express ourselves in our own languages. And then yet in the continent, it's the other way around. You get punished exactly for doing that, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's also very important decolonial discourse takes place also in the African continent and not only in the diaspora. And I don't know if you have had this also that, in Europe right now, everybody's talking about decolonize. The curricula of Kenya, that teachers also learn that, it's okay to speak your own mother tongue and not, to be punished, and that they use the same colonial punishments that, fathers and generations before us also used because they could not speak English. So they're using the same methods, right? So, what
Mm.
is your take on the question of decolonize, and how can the Kenyan curricula be decolonized for the African child and also for the teacher?
Okay. Let me also just add on to that as I was I was I was just thinking, and also it's something we practice at Children in Freedom School. There is a disconnect between teaching the African their languages without rooting it in the why, because you have to be very cognizant of the current situation that the African is growing up in. We are speaking, even in this meeting, we are speaking a foreign language, somebody else's mother tongue, and it's a language that has grown in strength in that it's become the international language more or less, okay, alongside other colonial languages. So we can't run away from that. And how do we then teach children their languages and to embrace their languages and not just teach language? If you just go to people and teach them their mother tongue, okay, I can know it, but I'll not speak it. I don't value it. Okay, I can know it, but I don't value it just as much as I value a foreign language, which will get me a job, will make me look good in society. So you see, there are values that have been given to that other language that are stripping our own languages of value. The first thing we need to do to the African is to build their African identity, that they love it, that you're so crazy and loving of yourself as Black, as African. You think Africa is the best continent, is the best thing that is ever there. And indeed it is. We've just been sold a narrative. Of course, some part of the narrative is practically correct, but has been grown to a proportion where it's easier to talk negative of Africa and Black people than it is to talk about the positivity of us. If we now teach positivity of the African, of the Black, how great we are, that the oldest fossils, Dinknesh, called Lucy in Ethiopia, is a Black woman who lived 3.8 million years ago, that life started from that. And then you go on to tell them about the richest man who ever lived, Mansa Musa. He's been dead 700 years. The current people have never reached his wealth. You understand? When you build the African psyche, like Africa is great, everything good came from here, be it now, be it in the past, whatever, you are everything. You will not have to tell people to learn the African languages. They'll die to learn that language. They'll be like, oh my God, I'm so full of myself, I need to speak my language. So that's the difference when you take an Afrocentric route than just take how can I say, superficial route, like buttering the bread. Or let's just teach people their mother tongue. You're just teaching people a language which they'll never feel value, which they don't feel like it's a currency for them, something great for them. I want to read a quote that I got from Kilolo's page, actually, his Facebook page, and it's a Ngugi wa Thiong'o quote. He said, in colonial conquest, language was meant to complete what the sword had started. Do to the mind what the sword has done to the body. Okay, the sword kills the body or maims the body. Now, language is meant to kill the little or whatever is left of your African self. A language can kill. It can make you feel your language is not, language can make you either edify yourself, grow your culture, understand everything here. I remember my grandmother being able to name trees, birds, animals in Kikuyu. And me, I'm just struggling to do it in English. I don't know them either in Kikuyu, English, or Swahili. That's how superficial my knowledges have become, because I'm not even good in my own language. When it comes down to the school, how do we make it practical? Okay, so I've talked first about not just teaching the language just like that, but filling the African with their greatness, that they know that they matter and they're great, they're the best. An African should just know that they're the best thing that ever happened to the world. Okay, once you have that mindset, you will just want to improve. Teacher, me I'm Kikuyu, I want to learn my language. Teacher, me I'm Luo. When you now put those lessons, the child is just absorbed, because they are dying to know who they are and to own themselves. And of course, before that, the teachers need that training as well, the Afrocentric awareness that you are great, you matter. So if the teacher gets it, imagine the teacher will now be the bridge, okay, to taking that child to where they're supposed to be. Let me pass on to Professor Kimani.
Yes, Dr. You are so right. I mean, we must take a holistic approach to language learning. So it's yeah, we know the value of language. We know that language has intrinsic value. We also know it has extrinsic value. Intrinsically is that it allows you to get opportunities in the world, but at the intrinsic level, it gives you the confidence, the self-esteem, it gives you your self-identity and so on. And you are very right about the holistic approach, because one of the challenges we have had in Africa is the assumption that Africa, our history begins with colonialism. And that we need not go, to the pre-colonial period to understand who we are. And therefore, when we take a holistic view, we go to the pre-colonial period. We look at our people and how they lived, how they engaged the environment, how they governed themselves, how they built knowledge, around them, and how they interacted with other communities. And we look at the colonial experience of the slave trade, and of course now the empire building process and what it did to the African people. So once we appreciate that, then we are able to get into the world in a clearer manner. And of course, we also look at the continuities of the colonial experience. So I think that language ought to be taught within that wider understanding of the decolonization of knowledge, and what constitutes knowledge, for the African child. And I think that there is a very serious problem where the African child assumes that what their great grandparents knew is not knowledge, and that knowledge begins with the white person. So that's a major problem. And I think that even as we work on African languages within the educational system, we need to go back to decolonizing histories, and decolonizing epistemologies, and knowledge and so forth, and inscribing our languages into the various disciplines. So just to really agree with you, and I think that the function of translation, and drawing on the community archives of knowledge is really important. Maybe Rahab has an additional comment to make on this one. Dr. Njeri.
Yes, thank you so much. Exactly what I wanted to say, the words of, in order for us to be able to move on as a continent, right? Even when we have this Africa Agenda 63, this will not be possible if we do not decolonize our history in the African continent, because our history goes way back before slavery, before colonialism. We had been there. If we teach our children that we were the first humans, and we are the creators of even the languages that have been spoken in different places, and that we are, the first people who, created civilizations. Dr. Utheri, thank you for also teaching your children, of histories of, of the West Africa, of people like Kanka Musa. yeah, that they do understand that there were people already who look like them, who are already able to achieve so much. And this is the history that has always been erased, or it still remains hidden in either in libraries, or some people have this knowledge. Even the people who produce knowledge are also the ones who empower and control what can be taught and what cannot be taught. So us being able to reproduce that knowledge, our own knowledge, our own African centered knowledge of our own histories, I think that goes hand in hand in also understanding our own cultures, but also in also us understanding how important our languages are and the power behind our African languages, and that our children will be more empowered once they understand the history behind their languages, and what they can be able to achieve by them learning the languages. I think Professor Ngugi says a lot that it's not about you not learning another language, but it's about you learning your language and then learning all other languages. And for me, this has been a big lesson, because I was just sitting yesterday preparing for this, and I was thinking to myself, if I can be able to, teach or be able to, talk about post-colonial theories in Kikuyu, this would be a real empowerment, right? Because I'm able to express myself not only in my mother tongue, but I'm also able to express myself in German, and I'm also able to express myself in English. So if I'm able to learn German, then it's also very much possible for me to be able to learn my own mother tongue, and also to do away with that negative association with the African languages that we've learned from colonialism, that we think that our languages are useless, and that our languages need not to be on the same level as English, French, or any other languages. So absolutely correct. In the archives of languages and archives of history, it's exactly what we will need in the African continent, as well as here in the diaspora. Us as African people, as Molefi Asante would say, being able to produce our own knowledges and our own histories in our own languages and in our own terms. So thank you so much for that. This is really great. So I am going now to go on the other side, because there was an article I read a few weeks ago, and it really got me a little bit irritated, and I thought maybe I should bring this here up. And this was an article in the Nation newspaper. It was written on August 16 this year by a student called Patricia, and she's from a high school. I don't know if you read it, or if you have heard about the article. Calls it tribalism, teens must stop speaking mother tongue, which I found very provocative, but also at the same time, a discourse that might be happening among young people in Kenya, or even in the continent. Allow me to quote just a small part of what she wrote, because I thought this would be very, would go very well with our discussion for today. And she writes in this article that according to her, it's disheartening to see young boys and girls being forced to speak in their mother tongue. And she continues by saying that the older generation considers a failing tongue as un-African, but there's no space for tribe in today's fast-paced world. So this is a quote that I've taken from that article that was written in August, in August in 2021. So, listening, or following this article, my question was really thinking in terms of, does learning your own mother tongue, or learning African languages, contribute to tribalism? And following that question will be, is our current world, or what has been termed as a global village, do we really need mother tongues? So maybe I'll let Professor Kimani start.
Thank you very much, Dr. Njeri, for that question. Yes, I actually read that article in The Nation, and I was really shocked, because, we know that languages themselves do not create feelings of superiority of one ethnic, of one community over another. They do not necessarily create hate. When you speak a language, you do not necessarily increase, hatred against any other community. the tensions that we experience between ethnic groups are normally about the struggle for resources and struggle for power and so on. They have absolutely nothing to do with the language. You can be extremely ethnic, in terms of your perspective, uh, through the use of English. I mean, a classic example is, say, in Somalia, where the people speak one language, but because of the struggle for resources, they will fight. Or even in the case of Rwanda, where you had Kenya Rwanda, but you had the Hutu and the Tutsi, fighting over access to power and resources and so on. So this feeling, this attitude that our ethnic identity, our ability to speak languages is a problem because it increases difference, ethnic difference, is really a misconception of what languages do. You can be extremely ethnic in your perspective in French or in German and so on. It's what languages carry and what you put in that language that can divide or unite people. So that is, for me, I'm very, very clear. And I think that we really do need to debunk this view, which is perpetuated by those people who are opposed to us promoting African languages. And of course, African languages have everything to do with the contemporary world. I mean, if you cannot do, if okay, so let's look at artificial intelligence, for example, which is designed around languages and people's behaviors and practices. If artificial intelligence is fully dependent on European languages, you can be sure that that is what's going to be seen to be universal, and Africa is going to be mapped around Europe and around America. I think that Africa needs to be at the center of the work of artificial intelligence. And I also want to agree with you, Dr. Njeri, on the whole question of the intellectualization of African languages. There should be opportunities, really, to teach philosophy in African languages. I mean, we've been doing it in Kiswahili, but we need to do it in other languages that the continent offers. And I think that this deliberate development of our languages, so that they do not just communicate simple ideas, but also complex ideas, is really, really important. And I think this is one of the functions of the African intellectual, to be able to contribute in the growth and intellectualization of African languages, so that we are able to engage with the most complex ideas possible, just as the Chinese have done with their languages, just as the Japanese have done with their languages, and Germans and other nationalities. I think that with this a responsibility that we bear, we must carry. At the African Academy of Languages, we are advancing, of course, Kiswahili, but we're also advancing other African languages. And I think that that's the way to do it. We just need more of us to be doing this, Dr. Njeri.
Very much, Professor Kimani. Dr. Utheri? You're muted.
I don't really have, yes, I don't really have much to add over what Professor Kimani has said. Honestly, I think that article is misguided, arenas, all those words, okay? Remember what we said earlier, that the African language is not seen as holding value, as not seen as something that you'd benefit from knowing. Okay, so this writer, I can see where she's coming from, but these are two different things. Knowing your language and being tribalistic are totally two different things. I think, and Professor Kimani has unpacked it properly, because my being tribal does not mean then that I will not if I don't know my language, that I will stop being tribal. I could know all the Luya I have, or I want to know all the Kisi I want to know, and still be tribal to someone who is not in my tribe. I could speak all the English, that I know, all the German that I know, and hate the very German and hate the very English. So it doesn't hold any water. And it just goes back to Africans, let's love ourselves. Let's love ourselves. Let's know what is good for us. And then we'll not have time to even write and even think in such a misguided way.
Yes, absolutely. I found the article very provocative. I was thinking this is a young person about how languages can contribute to tribalism. And I was also thinking in the lines Professor Kimani has said, this has got nothing to do with the languages, right? I mean, also Dr.
Mm,
Utheri, also it has got nothing to do with languages. I can be able to speak my mother tongue or not be able to speak my mother tongue and nonetheless be very tribal. And I think this is why the question of decolonizing the African classrooms and the education system is very important, because this is where that kind of knowledge used, where they keep on reproducing the same thing, in terms of that people think that one is better than the other, and do not really understand that tribalism is also a strategy to divide and rule us, right? It's a way of making
yes.
sure that certain people gain or retain their power. And when you really think about even the concept of tribalism, it really doesn't help anybody, right? Until now, it hasn't helped anybody. It hasn't been able to make us better. It hasn't made us progress. It hasn't made us build more industries. It hasn't made us have more jobs, right? So it's just a concept of making sure that we remain where I almost want to say the European want us to remain, and that is at the bottom, right? That
Mm-hmm.
we are not self-independent, because every time we want to be self-independent, there are always things that are used to lock us down and put us down. So and that's why I found the article very provocative, especially written from someone who is very young, and really that construction, of how you can really put then the whole blame on the language and not on the systems and the structures of white colonialism that still continue to be in the African continent, or are still used in the African continent. So absolutely, I thought I should bring that
And
up.
mhm,
You are our expert,
mhm.
yes, Dr. Oderi?
Yeah, so Dr. Njeri, I think it's also very important to involve that right and people like with that kind of conception in conversations. I wish even that person would be in our conversation here, because that's how to change mindsets when you try and understand where they're coming from, and you sort of also place your ideas and your interpretations on the table. You might just tweak some sort of understanding in the other person, because the more that they are not engaged, the more they are just in their own tunnel visioned place, um, thinking in that screwed way. It's not good. Then I also want to say that for the African, it looks like you never win, because in as much as you now embrace the colonial language, you are speaking it with an accent that is your mother tongue, and it's never
Mm-hmm.
good enough. You are going to, and that's why I'm saying cannot divorce language from identity and who you really are, because now even my English is not with the accent of the English or the American, but if there's another African with a more enhanced accent, we tend to look at them as more educated, more scholarly, more successful, and that now just shows us how we are caught up in an ending. It's an unending prison, an unending corner where the African will never be good enough. But when you speak your Gikuyu and you speak your Kisi, it doesn't matter how many years you've lived abroad, the accent is always authentic. Doesn't matter how many countries you travel, your own language, your mother tongue. I mean, I think you must be really colonizing the mind to even change the accent of your mother tongue. Try to put an English accent. It happens, and some people have done it, but they're the minority. You'll find that people speaking in a very good English accent, just like a foreigner, but when they speak their own language, it goes back to the authentic self, the authentic phrases, the authentic ways of expression. That tells you you can never really run away from who you are. If you embrace who you are, as Ngugi wa Thiong'o tells us, you are empowered. But then when you try to get other people's cultures and languages first, then you are enslaved. And it's very easy with my example to show how you're enslaved, even to how you express yourself and how you judge yourself.
Yes, absolutely. It's not the accent that makes you more African or more European, right? Like if the German
Oh,
English or another language, they would still have their the and
exactly.
other, which you'll still be able to trace this is a German speaker or this is someone who's coming from a German speaking country, right? But thank you also for mentioning the thing of accents, because it's also seen as a way of putting people or certain people in a certain class once they can be able to express themselves in English and even have the accent to it. Then it seems like you're higher educated. It seems as if you belong to a certain class. It's also a privilege to be able to speak that way. And once in a while, yes, your mother tongue will call you back. If you're Kikuyu, you're definitely going to misspell between R and L, no matter how long you've stayed. So accepting who you are, accepting your roots, and accepting that yes, you're African, and there's nothing wrong with you, and that there's nothing wrong with your own mother tongue, and that if people from Sweden can speak English and still have their Swedish accent, so why can't you, as a person of African descent, if you're still living in the continent or even outside of the continent, why can't you still be proud of having that one thing that you retained, that brings you back to the roots and brings you back to Mother Africa? So I think that's also very important, a very important discourse. Also, at the same time, it's very important to have such people who have such opinions, especially because they are very young and these are our future. This is our future leaders, to have them on the table and have them speak about how they feel the languages, and also helping them re-educate and educate themselves so that they can understand the struggles that our foremothers and our forefathers have been struggling with and have been fighting, and that they continue with that struggle by understanding the content of why African languages are very important. So I think that's very powerful um, for us to be able to learn. I'm going to come now to almost conclusions, and then we can talk in depth about certain things. But I just wanted to know, Dr. Utheri or Professor Kimani, are changing the narratives to ensure that our children grow with the conscious knowledge of their cultures and their languages. And then maybe also adding to that, what challenges are you facing?
So thanks very
I'll start
much,
with you.
Dr. Njeri, for that question. So one of the things that we really need to constantly remind ourselves is the role of government in ensuring that our children are getting the right education and getting the right opportunities to learn. So I have been part of a group that has been working, really hard to build a national language policy that underscores the role of our languages within the educational system. And of course, we know that this is a contest of power. So we are struggling against an elite that, mistakenly believes that only English will open the doors for our children to have access to opportunities in the North. And we have taken the view that we are not fighting English. We want our children to understand English, but we also want them to have access to our languages so that they are able to engage the rest of the world with confidence. So we are helping change the narrative at the policy level and also the legislative level. So we were part of the group that really pushed for things, for a constitutional framework that is helpful. And we continue doing that. I know that under the current reforms, our children are supposed to have 5 years of indigenous language learning, and that there will be opportunities for even learning our languages beyond high school. But we think that there is still a gap because of certain capacities with regard to, standardization of writing, the number of teachers that can actually teach our languages, absence of writing materials, and so forth and so on. And also, perceptions from parents who still think that when our children learn our languages, that they are being denied an opportunity to excel in the Western world. So we are changing the narrative at a number of levels, at the level of policy and legislative framework, but also in terms of practice, are really encouraging people and working with the media houses to entrench our languages whenever an opportunity provides itself. So I think it's a long journey. It's a very, very rigorous journey. I think that we will continue working hard. We will continue challenging the government. We'll continue challenging policymakers. We'll continue challenging teachers. And of course, we must commend the efforts of institutions that are taking these things seriously. So under devolution, there is an opportunity for children to learn our languages in the counties. But again, it depends on whether the leadership in the counties takes this seriously and sees this as an opportunity for them to strengthen our languages. So Dr. Njeri, I can say that we are changing the narrative. We are working very hard, but we are also faced with some of these challenges that have to do with personnel and attitudes and resources, to uplift our languages.
Can I just add to that and just say I'm really happy that Professor Kimani has brought about parents. It's actually a point that I had written here, because it's an issue that's so present. We want our children to learn their mother tongues. And the fastest and most useful, effective way to do that is through their parents. And if parents themselves are not embracing of their mother tongue because of the colonial kind of education and exposure they have received, not only at school, even in their homes. Okay, I share something similar with Dr. Njeri. I learned my Gikuyu, which is, I think I can mark myself at 60%, 70%. Tikioru mono, but I could be much better. Okay, and my English is better than my Kikuyu. That tells you the kind of background I've had, where you go back home and your parents are speaking to you in English, but speaking to each other in Kikuyu. So when your grandmother visits you, she's speaking to you in Kikuyu, but you answer back with a broken Kikuyu and English, and that goes on. So I learned my Kikuyu in high school. The importance of the parental role. How can we now tap into parents as a resource to teach mother tongue? So they must be brought on board on this. Secondly, the CBC, Professor Kimani has also talked about that, the reforms in education. So we have a new curriculum, competency-based curriculum, which one of the objectives is to bring people back to embracing their cultures, embracing their mother tongue. I think a school like ours, Children in Freedom School, would never have been alive, thriving, if it wasn't that we are operating within the new reforms. Because we believe in Afrocentrism, and that means teaching children their mother tongue, which is a key player, a key point, a key objective in CBC. So I think if we keep knocking, and chipping, hammer chip on that big rock, we'll get somewhere. The structures are being put in place by government that would lift the teaching of mother tongue to children. But I'm seeing the problem, the parents. We need to get to that big lot and find out how we can empower parents to also empower their children in language.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the parents play a major role in how also children, understand the African languages. If your parent punishes you for speaking the language as we've spoken before, then of course this child will not have any positive association with speaking his or her own mother tongue. And then again, if we only, take a few and leave others behind, the concept will still not work because there are still those who do not understand why is it important that I, as a parent, teach my child my mother tongue, or why is it important? Everybody else speaks English or another language for them to be seen as people who are successful in the society, right? This sometimes reminds me so much of, how language is always used as a way of defining who can make it in life and who can't make it, right? Like if you're really good in English, you're really in French, and your parents will emphasize that you speak, or even look for schools where you can learn these languages, but they will not look for schools where you can really learn your own mother tongue. Yeah, and here sometimes in Kenya, there are even parents, or certain families that look for house help who only speak English, so that they do not speak with their babies or with their toddlers mother tongues, or speak any other language except English. Just thinking about that concept, that maybe in a few years, all we'll be having people who have had an education from English speaking countries coming to work in the household, so that this can really be upheld, to be able to speak to speak to our small children in English, or in other foreign languages. And I think this is very important, that also parents, especially, again, them being the caregivers, and them being the first people that we encounter when we're already young, that they're also empowered to understand the power behind them speaking the African languages or their own mother tongues, and that what they're giving their children is very important. Yes, Dr. Utheri. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, just to support what you're saying, there are 6 official languages of the United Nations: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. No African language, no indigenous African. These are colonial African languages, and they're the ones that are acknowledged internationally as languages of communication. Okay, but Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he did something really out of the box earlier this year. Was it late last year? So when he was receiving or being awarded the Catalonia International Prize, he addressed the world in Gikuyu, and then they had to look for translators. Of course, it's done for other languages. They'll automatically use technology to translate it, and it got done. Meaning, when we stand with our languages and are proud of our languages, even if organizations, global organizations like the UN, do not recognize our languages as an official language, even Swahili, at least, which is spoken by so many people, then we ourselves can lift it, be the champions to lift our languages and push for them to be respected and acknowledged internationally.
Yes, absolutely. And again, you can see if the 6 official languages of the UN have do not include any African language, we can already see the colonial forces behind, and the power behind who defines which languages are official or not official. It's the same way with the question of, if you can read in your own mother tongue, but you cannot read in English or in other, oral European languages, then you're not considered as right. And this is something that has been happening in the past, and now it's also being questioned. We have to start. We have already started, critically criticizing, even such policies that say these are the official languages, and what about the other languages? The issue has always been, yeah, in Africa you speak so many languages. How do we define then one? How do we pick then one? And then my question has always been, how had we been living before you came? Right? I mean, this was still very much possible. People were still moving from one place to the next, and they were able to communicate with each other. So, what were the strategies and communication medium did they use to be able to understand that? And so, even this categorization of languages, and the bringing of languages down to official and non-official languages, is already very much colonial, which keeps on excluding us as
Yes.
African people in this dialogue, right? When I sometimes hear that people want to start speaking Chinese or learn Chinese, or that Kenya wants to teach children Mandarin, and then I'm wondering, why don't you start with teaching that child Luo? Eluya, Kamba, Kisi, before you start bringing another language that has this child cannot identify. It has got nothing to do with the identity of this child. It has got nothing to do with the culture of this child. So again, this is also a in terms of languages, because now they're being forced, or another language is being imposed upon them. Really, they cannot identify with this language. What does a child in somewhere, if I may use this as an example, a Maasai child the Chinese culture, right? And this child maybe doesn't even know his own Maasai culture, right? Because learn Maasai or the Ma culture, you are told that is backward. You know, if you want to succeed, you have not to learn Chinese. And then I'm asking myself, do the Chinese have the same regulations? Can they also learn our African languages? This should be one of the, Professor Kimani sitting on, boards. This should be a requirement that if they come, they need to be speaking at least one African language. You know, the same way the European impose regulations that if you're coming from the African continent, if you're coming, for instance, in Germany, you must at least have done CA or A1 in order for you to get a visa. So it should work also the same way, right? Like this should be also the requirement that we say you can speak an African language and one African language, or being able to speak the language that is being used in that particular country, so that you can also get entry. Yes, Dr. Derry.
That is why Afrocentrism should be taught in all schools. It shouldn't be a children in freedom thing, or at least if it scales up or it transfers to other public schools or African schools, it should be an international thing, even in the international schools where they're teaching maybe a European curriculum, following a European curriculum. They should have an African center. In fact, I'm so excited about this African Academy of Languages. They should be now centers. You people should be the spearheads, making sure there is a teacher there who can teach. So, I mean, when you go to the international schools in Kenya alone, they are full of local students. Those local students, it is fine. Do whatever curriculum you want to do, but alongside it, let us put the salt on this child. Let them be Afrocentric, okay? That means if there is a Maasai there, let them learn their Maasai. What are you doing learning all the cultures and languages of outside? Your own, you don't know. That's how you'll always look at yourself down. You'll never fit in. You'll never be a foreigner, okay? And you will also never fit in among your community. So it's just that thing of being lukewarm. It doesn't augur very well. So I was just adding to what you're saying. I got excited and I just imagined at one point there'll be African languages centers in all schools. Regardless, you just add value to the curriculum. You just add value. There's no problem in teaching Mandarin in our school. We are multilingual. We'll do the English, which now I'm here speaking very well. We'll do Swahili, which has become a foreign language to many people. And I'm just impressed that Professor Kimani is just a pillar in that language, because we need that. Then we do our mother tongue. You must learn your mother tongue. And then you must learn a local language. It's like me learning English. Surely, I'm not English, but I learned English. The same way I can do my Gikuyu, but I can choose to do Luo, so that we're just full of our own first. Then we also do Mandarin and French. And there's time. By the way, there is time in the CBC curriculum. Even in the 844 curriculum, lunch times were 2 hours. For what? Africans, you don't need a 2-hour lunch break, and you are being seen at the bottom of the world's pyramid. You need to use your time well. Use every time well. Yes, have lunch by all means. Have a 30-45 minutes lunch, but you have another 45 minutes to learn your mother tongue or to learn some African histories. So that's the kind of thing that I am hoping and praying can be in every school.
Professor Kimani?
Yes, I'll be rather brief in this one. Just to say that part of the reason why people are going to Chinese Mandarin is a misconception that children will have access to the Chinese market. The Chinese will open their doors to South Asia before they open the doors to Africa. This is the truth. So, so part of it's a misconception that we will become teachers in China if we learn their language. We will never become teachers in China. This is the truth. So we need to get this out of the way. The other thing, when we are pushing for the policy, one of the things that we tried to do for Kenya was to say that all children must be given the opportunity to not only learn their mother tongue, but to also learn other Kenyan languages. And that the government must put in place systems for a Gikuyu child to learn the Luo if they so wish. And that there must be resources availed for those children who want to learn other Kenyan languages to do so. It's very, very important, that it's not just about the mother tongue, it's also about the languages that are around us and the opportunities to create those opportunities for our children to learn those other languages. So this is really key. Now, we also put in the national language policy a requirement for any foreigner who wants to to work in Kenya, to show proficiency in a Kenyan language, if, whether it is Kiswahili or some other Kenyan language, the way we do TOEFL, or we do these other foreign exams, they must also be subjected to that. You cannot be saying that you're working in infrastructure in Mumias when you do not speak a single word of the Luo or of Luya, and you are supposed to be an expert. It's unacceptable. So really, we must look at this thing holistically, and we must be able to inscribe ourselves and to put conditions around which we engage with the rest of the world. And I'm very clear in my mind that this is the right path to take. When it comes to Kiswahili as the language of Pan-Africanism, we are saying we will have Kiswahili as the language of Pan-Africanism, but that does not mean that Kiswahili will undermine Yoruba, Igbo, Zulu, and so on. It's just that we need to have one language that sets in motion a certain idea about ourselves, and that this becomes the language of Pan-African identity, and so on. So we are working very hard through different institutions to really anchor Kiswahili as the language of Pan-Africanism, even as we celebrate all the other languages of Africa. And I think that we have to be very deliberate, like Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o supervised me in my PhD. So he is my mentor. He taught me. I took his class in comparative literature. So I have been nurtured by his thinking and his writing and so on. And I can tell you that one of the ways in which I used to earn my allowances during the summer, during my graduate studies in the US, was in teaching Gikuyu. So for 8 weeks, you come to my class, I teach you Gikuyu 5 hours every day, and the university paid me, for teaching Gikuyu in the US. Of course, teaching Kiswahili also, but teaching Gikuyu. And that's how I made my money in the summer. I didn't go doing other jobs. I actually taught Gikuyu. And I had students, and the university paid me. So I think there are many opportunities for doing that. And of course, you have to be strategic in how we engage the world. And I really think, and I have to thank Jalada for the amazing work, really the amazing work they are doing in languages, Dr. Njeri.
Yes, I am almost clapping because that's very important. What you just said, even us having Kiswahili as the Pan-African language doesn't mean that other languages should be lost or that we should not learn the other languages. They are as important as one language which you can be able to communicate, among ourselves. And maybe Kiswahili might come then as one of the official languages of the UN, right? If
Yes.
they already have Chinese, then please do put Kiswahili because we have now a lot of Swahili speakers within the continent. and that already qualifies it to be an official language, under the UN language charter, if they have something like that. So very important that we accept and understand that our languages are key to our histories and to our archives and what we want to do in the future. Dr. Utheri.
I just wanted to add to what Professor Kimani has said. He is an excellent example of when you value your language, what it does. If you don't value it, everyone is walking all over it, telling you erase it, you're clapping for them. If you value it, you even get paid to teach others to speak it just the way someone has gotten paid to teach us English. Okay. And I remembered Prince Harry learning Swahili, and the internet was going viral because of that. So he also wanted to learn an African language so that he's able to communicate better as he does his community service projects that he does so well in Africa.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we should also start a rewarding system. As as Professor Kimani said in the beginning, you also mentioned that, Dr. Utheri. One of the reasons why we founded CAL, because we want to reward those people who otherwise would remain invisible because they're using their mother tongues. We now know there are so many people who are able to even to do, technology, to be able to do sciences in their own mother tongues, not only in terms of culture, but also in terms of women empowerment, and even the fact that, someone like Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o can speak to an international audience and speak in Kikuyu, already that says that yes, it is possible. And as Dr. Utheri, you said correctly, if they can find translators for all other languages, then it should also be possible for us, to have translators of our own languages. And maybe this would mean that, people who already, and with this I mean maybe people like Dr. Utheri, Professor Kimani, that you deliberately speak your own mother tongues when you go to conferences, and you use translators as a way of protest and as a way of saying we also want our African languages to be used and to be at the center when we are having certain discussions. I don't know if any of you would like to add something to that. I just saw that Professor Kimani wrote there are 120 million speakers of Kiswahili. So yes, it does qualify as one of the UN. Okay. So
Just
I
to
think
wrap
we are
up,
going to.
just one sentence, to
Yes.
just say that we must give dignity to our languages at all time. And I think that one of the things that we should be able to do is really the African intellectuals, not to be seen to be fighting African languages. I think that's where we should begin. That African intellectuals must recognize on behalf of their communities that there's something really wrong when they fight the use of African languages at any level. So this endorsement, the complete endorsement of African languages by African intellectuals is really, really important. At the other level is really the investment in African languages by governments, that they must put money for the development of African languages. And then finally, that we must target parents again very, very deliberately for them to understand the problem of them fighting, African languages, and that for them to recognize that there is in fact, that you learn English better if the English is grounded in an African language, that you use your first language to learn English, you use your first language to learn French or German or whichever other language you want. So you have a base around which you do that. And finally, to say that one of my professors, the late Professor Jenkins, got a stroke, and he was a professor of languages. When he got the stroke, he lost English, he lost Kiswahili, but he did not lose Kigiriama. So when we met, he would always speak to me in Kigiriama. He couldn't remember English, he couldn't remember Kiswahili. And yet he was one of the foremost scholars of Kiswahili in the linguistics department at the University of Nairobi. The base language remained because the others are superficial. So I just wanted to give that example to show the centrality of our languages and the beauty of being multilingual. Because if you only have one language and you get a stroke, you lose the only facility you have. But if you are multilingual, one disappears, the second one disappears, the third one remains. So there is this even biological value of having our languages. Again, thank you so much for a great conversation, Dr. Njeri and Dr. Utheri. And I hope that we can continue discussing off this platform going forward.
Yes, Dr. Utheri, your last words.
Just to say thank you for having me and having us. It's been amazing. I even feel empowered. I'm going out there and changing more lives. I'm just excited and always continue my life rooted, raising African children rooted in their African heritage. And language is part of that heritage. So, of course, let's continue. Professor Kimani, I'm so excited that there's work on the national level about languages and putting in the right place our mother tongues and our local languages. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I also hope that Professor Kimani, you can also continue, supporting Dr. Utheri and her school as they continue and educating our future leaders and especially the children who are going to be the carriers of our and the keepers of our African languages and histories. So I really do hope that she also gets the resources because she does need the resources in order to be able to continue doing the incredible work she's doing. So I'm very, very, very thankful to have had the opportunity to speak with both of you. So much, Dr. Utheri. Thank you so much, Professor Kimani. It has been very educative for me and very inspiring and seeing there's a lot that still needs to be done. But I think when we are together and communicate with each other, then I think there's nothing that is possible or impossible. I will just want to finish this, with again, a quote from Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, because I think he's just an incredible person, and has been able to even been able to pull people like me who Western education to really go back into my own history and my own culture, with the and it continues to emphasize our own mother tongues. And this was the first thing that he told me when I met him when he came to Cologne. He told me, even if you learn all the other languages and you do not speak your own mother tongue, you're still miseducated. And that thing has stayed with me until now. And that's why I keep on trying to, learn my own mother tongue, because it's also a way of decolonizing not only my mind, but also decolonizing the body. And even like today, me wearing my African attire is also a part of that. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to, finish with, a short quote that I think can very well. And the quote is also from Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o from the book Decolonizing the Mind, where he writes that the call for rediscovery and the resumption of our language is a call for a regenerative reconnection with the millions of revolutionary tongues that Africa and the world over demanding liberation. It is a call for the rediscovery of the real language of humankind, the language of struggle. And I would like to end our discussion with that and an afterthought that our African languages are languages of struggle. So thank you very much, and it has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope we meet again. Thank you.